Welcome back to Occult Archives, where we dig into those books that history has, kind of tucked away in the shadows.
Those books that some might say are too potent, too dangerous to just open up casually.
Exactly. We're not about just rumors or, scary stories here. We want to go directly to those sources, to the actual texts themselves.
And in this deep dive, episode 255, we're cracking open the Gardnerian Book of Shadows. It's often called uh, Hidden Laws, Forbidden Rituals, and the Occult Resurrection of the Witch Cult. Very dramatic, but it gets to the heart of what some believe about this book.
And to do this, we've got excerpts from Gerald Gardner himself. He's considered the architect of modern Gardnerian witchcraft, so this book, it's like the blueprint.
It's foundational, and in it we find the structure, the beliefs, the practices. It's a whole system, really, that he brought to light.
And that's what we're going to unpack. The core elements, from like the very first step of casting a circle to the intense initiations and those, those Sabbat rituals throughout the year.
Right. And in doing so, we want to figure out, well, why did this book become so important? And why, for some people, why did it invoke fear?
We'll explore the practices, the philosophy behind them, but we're not gonna take sides on anything that might be, a bit sensitive.
Our aim is to present what Gardner wrote, what he put forward as a revival of something ancient. To really understand it, we've got to start at the beginning with the circle, casting that sacred space. What's the point of that in the Book of Shadows?
Yeah, what's the big deal with the circle?
Well, it's about creating a protected space, a boundary. It's for magical work, sure, but it's almost like a point of connection, where the everyday world and other realms, they can meet. It's about, well, setting the scene, holding the energy, making a space where ritual can work.
So is this circle, is it like something permanent? Like, is it always there, or do they have to create it every time they want to do something magical?
It's interesting. The book mentions, using things like chalk or even just arranging furniture to mark it out temporarily. But the real circle, the one that holds the magical energy for each ceremony, that's made with a consecrated magic sword or an athame. So it's an active creation every time.
So how big are we talking here? Does size matter?
Apparently it does. The standard they give is a 9-foot diameter, but it does say that you can, adjust that as needed. What's interesting is they then talk about casting 2 more circles outside of that one, each 6 inches apart.
Yeah.
So the outermost circle would be 11 feet across. It's like a layered approach to making that sacred space.
Okay, so a circle within a circle within a circle. Now, we know from our research that the way they actually cast the circle, that changed a bit over time, right? Like, what was the first method, the one from around 1949?
Yes. In the early version, you start with the center point. It could be a sickle or a scimitar, which they call the sword of art, or an athame. Then you take a cord. They specifically say the cable tow, which has other uses too, and it's 4.5 feet long, so that's your radius. And you use that to mark out the circumference around that center point.
Huh.
But the key is you have to use the sword or a black-hilted knife to trace it out. And they're very specific about leading and opening a doorway facing north. Then you draw, like we were saying, 3 circles, one inside the other, with names of power written between them.
So it's very precise, very deliberate. What about the later version? Around 1957, things got a little more elaborate, didn't they?
Right. It's more ceremonial in a way.
Yeah.
You start with the magus, and he consecrates the salt and the water, which we'll talk about in a second, how that's done. Then the high priestess, she takes the sword and conjures it, charges it up with her intention. Then the magus draws the 3 circles. They have lines pre-marked starting and ending in the east. The high priestess follows, sprinkling the circle with the consecrated water, that's called asperging, and then she censes the whole space with incense, including everyone there. And they repeat that, this time with just the incense. After that, the magus, he takes the implements and puts them on the altar, but he gives the sword back to the high priestess. And then she walks slowly around the circle, invoking, calling upon the circle of space as a kind of protective boundary,
Yeah.
a meeting point between our world and what they call the dreadlords of the outer spaces. And in that act, she calls upon Aradia and Cernunnos, who are very important figures in this tradition.
You mentioned the consecrating of the salt and the water. How is that done?
Well, it's about purifying the water, getting rid of anything negative. They call it exorcising the water. And the salt that's blessed to bring in good energy. For the water, they use the athame, and they touch it to the water while saying specific words to banish any impurities, any bad influences, all in the names of Aradia and Cernunnos. And it's similar with salt, touch the athame to it, invoke a blessing, asking to remove anything negative and bring in the good. Again, all in the names of Aradia and Cernunnos. And then the blessed salt that's mixed into the exercise water. So you have this charged water, ready for the ritual.
And the fire, that plays a role too, right? Like with the candles in the circle.
Yes, fire also needs purifying. When they light the candles, they speak an incantation over the flame, like a command for any harmful spirits, any deceptive ones to get out, again, in the names of Aradia and Cernunnos. It's about making sure that even the light in that space is clean, free from any bad influences.
And what about closing the doors with pentagrams? What's that all about?
So once everyone's in the circle and everything's ready, they ritually close that doorway in the north, the one they left open when they first cast the circle. They do it by drawing 3 pentagrams in the air across the opening, like they're sealing the boundary, completing the protective space.
So the space is set, it's defined, it's purified, it's sealed. What's next in a typical, well, magical working?
They state the purpose, the goal of the ritual, what they're trying to achieve. After that, everyone in the circle, they walk clockwise around the perimeter, usually 3 times, sometimes more, before they start the main part of the ritual or the spell work. This walking, it helps to build energy, to focus their intention.
And then there's the summoning of the mighty ones. Who are these beings and how do they call them in?
These mighty ones, they're often seen as the elemental powers or guardians associated with the 4 directions: east, south, west, and north. They call them in with a specific phrase like, I summon, stir, and call thee up, thou mighty ones of the east, south, west, and north. As they say this, they salute each direction, and then they draw a pentagram in the air with the sword or athame. Now, the Book of Shadows, it's very specific. The first line of that pentagram has to be drawn from the top point down to the left. So it's like acknowledging and calling upon these cosmic forces to witness and maybe even lend their energy to what they're doing.
It's pretty amazing, all the care and the detail that goes into setting up this space. So the circle is cast, the guardians are called, and the stage is set for more specific rituals. One that's really interesting is the drawing down the moon. What actually happens in that ritual?
Drawing down the moon. It's a core ritual full of symbolism. It's where the high priestess, she becomes the embodiment of the goddess. It usually starts with her standing in front of the altar in what they call the goddess position, with her arms crossed over her chest. The magus, he kneels in front of her, and he uses a phallus-headed wand, which is a specific tool, to draw a pentacle on her body. As he does this, he's reciting a powerful invocation. It's a plea to the mighty mother of all life and fertility, asking her to come down and inhabit the body of the high priestess, who, by the way, is named during the ritual. The invocation calls on the powers of nature: seed, root, stem, bud, leaf, flower, fruit, life, love. It's invoking that whole cycle, that generative force of the goddess.
So once they believe that connection with the goddess has been made, then what? There's something called the 5-fold kiss, right?
Yes. After they've drawn down the moon, which is how they describe that link with the goddess being established, the magus and any other men there, they give the high priestess this 5-fold kiss. And these are specific kisses on 5 points of the body. Each kiss has a blessing that goes with it. There's one on the feet, which is, blessed be thy feet that have brought thee in these ways, acknowledging her journey. Then on the knees, blessed be thy knees that shall kneel at the sacred altar. So it's about her devotion. Then the womb, blessed be thy womb, without which we would not be, recognizing her role in creation. Then the breasts, blessed be thy breasts, formed in beauty and in strength, celebrating her life-giving power. And finally the lips, blessed be thy lips that shall speak the sacred names, so her divine communication. And at this point, the book says that all the women, they bowed their heads, showing respect.
It's a way of really connecting with that embodied goddess, right? This ritual also seems to be, sort of a gateway to other ceremonies, especially initiations in the Gardnerian tradition.
You're absolutely right. If an initiation is going to happen, the charge is given right after this. It's the core teachings, the philosophy and the spiritual ideas of the tradition. And it happens while the high priestess is still in the goddess position, and the person being initiated, called the postulant, is standing outside the circle, ready to enter.
And this charge, it's famously known as lift up the veil. It seems like both the magus and the high priestess speak during this part. What are the main ideas, the messages in this text?
It's written as if it's the Great Mother and the star goddess speaking directly. The magus invokes and speaks for the Great Mother, and the High Priestess does the same for the Star Goddess. And the Great Mother, she's identified with, well, with lots of goddesses from all kinds of cultures. Artemis, Astarte, Diana, and many more. It's like she's universal, multifaceted. And through the magus, she talks about meeting every month, ideally when the moon is full, in secret places to honor her as the queen of all witcheries and magics. She promises to teach secret sorcery and offers freedom, which is symbolized by being naked in some of the rites. Worshipping her is supposed to be joyful, sensual dancing, singing, feasting, music, expressions of love. She even talks about a secret door that leads to ecstasy and earthly joy, certainty in life, and peace in death, all without needing to sacrifice anything.
So it's a message of freedom, of finding joy in life. And what about the Star Goddess? What does she say through the High Priestess?
The Star Goddess. She speaks about connection, about desire. It's all about love, yearning, pleasure, and the flame that burns in the heart of every man and the core of every star. She says rituals for her should be full of joy and beauty, and that famous line, "All acts of love and pleasure are my rituals." You know, it's a really powerful statement about how human connection, human experience can be sacred. She's saying that anyone who seeks her will find her, and that she's been around since the very beginning.
The Book of Shadows is very clear that casting the circle, drawing down the moon, and giving the charge, these are all necessary steps before any initiation can happen in the Gardnerian system. So let's look at those initiations. There are 3 levels. What's special about the first degree initiation?
The first degree, it starts with a serious warning from the magus to the postulant, the person being initiated.
Yeah.
It's about testing their courage, their commitment. He asks them questions, and they have to give the password. Perfect love and perfect trust. It's all about the foundation of the tradition. Then they're blindfolded to symbolize entering the unknown, I suppose, and led through the north-facing doorway into the circle. Then they're bound with cords. The right ankle, both hands behind their back, making a triangle with their arms, and the neck, all bound with the cable toe. The magus leads them around the circle, clockwise, stopping at each of the 4 directions to announce that they're going to be made a priestess and a witch. Then comes what they call the ordeal, where they ring a bell 11 times, and the magus kneels and gives the postulant the 5-fold kiss like we talked about before. It's that physical connection to the sacred.
The binding, especially that triangle shape, seems really important. What does it symbolize?
The binding in the first degree, particularly that triangular shape of the arms, is often seen as a symbol of entering a liminal space, you know, like a threshold between one way of being and another. It restricts movement, which can make other senses stronger, and it creates a sense of, well, dependence, trust in the people guiding the ritual. And there's this phrase about the ankle binding, feet neither bound nor free, that also points to this in-between state. In some traditions, the triangle itself is associated with manifestation, with transformation, so that adds another layer to the symbolism.
So there's more binding at the altar, and then the oath. What happens there?
Yeah. Right. After the 5-fold kiss, the postulant is led to the altar and kneels down. Their feet are bound together, and then the cable toe, which was around their neck, is tied to a ring on the altar, so they're forced to bow low. Then, after 3 more rings of the bell, the magus asks the postulant if they're truly ready, ready to be true to the art and go through the ordeals. Then they swear a serious oath of secrecy, and they're scourged, symbolically, with a certain number of strokes, 3, 7, 9, and 21. The oath is traditionally sworn on a knife that's hidden their hair, and they promise to keep the secrets of the art, to only reveal them to others who've been properly initiated within a similar circle.
Scourging, that's part of the initiation. Wow, that sounds, well, pretty intense. What's the reason for that?
In the Book of Shadows, it's about purification, symbolic cleansing, and it's also a test of the initiate's willingness. Are they ready to accept the challenges, the discipline of the craft? Those specific numbers of strokes, 3, 7, 9, and 21, those are explained later on as having mystical meanings, connected to different parts of the tradition, different arts of magic. But in the initiation, it's supposed to be controlled, something that marks a big change for the postulant, like letting go of the old and embracing the new path. Some people think it can also raise energy, make you more aware.
So after the oath and the scourging, then what? They get consecrated and given the tools of the craft, right?
Right. After all that, they unbind the postulant and anoint them with consecrated oil and wine. And it's done in a specific way 3 times on the womb and the breasts to symbolize the life-giving, nurturing part of the goddess. Then they kiss the same spots, making those areas even more sacred. Then the magus declares them priestess and witch, recognizing their new place in the coven. Then comes the giving of the tools, the magic sword, a thame, white-handled knife, wand, pentacles, censer of incense, scourge, and cords. Each one is given separately, with an explanation of what it's for, and the magus kisses each one before giving it to the initiate. And to finish the first degree initiation, there's a final salute and a formal announcement to the four directions, telling everyone that this new priestess and witch has been accepted into the, well, the larger magical community.
Okay, so that's the first degree. Moving on to the second degree initiation. How does this build on the first level? What's different? What's new?
The second degree, it has some things from the first degree, like the binding and the walking around the circle. But this time, the postulant isn't blindfolded. That shows a deeper level of understanding, I guess. When they walk around the circle, they announce at each direction that the priestess and witch is going to be made a high priestess and witch queen. So it's a step up in the coven, more authority, more responsibility. The walking itself is more complex, too. They go around 3 times, and they do it with a specific dance step, bringing more movement and energy into the ritual. And then again, they kneel and get bound to the altar, but now the questions are about their willingness to struggle, to make sacrifices, to learn more, to gain more magical skill. So it's a deeper commitment. The scourging happens again, too, with the same number of strokes, that idea of discipline and purification. A big new part in the second degree is that they give the initiate a new magical name. It's given with a kiss, showing a deeper personal transformation.
And they swear a new oath of secrecy, this time calling upon the power of the mother's womb and their honor among their peers, so it's more mature, more responsibility. Then the magus, he kneels down, puts his hands on the initiate's head and knees, creating a magic link, and he wills power and authority into them. It's about passing on magical energy that comes with this higher level.
This willing of power, that sounds like a big moment, like they're transferring magical energy or recognizing the potential that's been developing.
Yes, that's the idea.
Yeah.
It's a symbolic act of giving them the specific powers and responsibilities of a high priestess. It's recognizing how far they've come and that they're ready to take a more active role in the coven, even a leadership role.
So what happens after this transfer of power?
Well, they consecrate them again. This time, they anoint them with the oil, wine, and kisses in a pattern of a point-down pentacle. It's different from the first degree, another layer of symbolism. And now the declaration is High Priestess and Witch Queen. It's official. The new High Priestess then uses each of the working tools to show that she understands and can control them. She uses them to scribe the circle, to wave, show, sense, and bind. And there's this interesting part where she also binds and symbolically scourges the magus 3 times, showing a kind of balance, of power and responsibility within the coven. The final step is a formal announcement to the 4 directions, telling everyone about this new high priestess and witch queen. And often they perform the legend of the goddess, which we talked about before, to give a sort of mythological background and explain how Wiccans are the hidden children of the goddess.
Right, that legend of the goddess, with all those themes of, well, descent, transformation, and accepting both life and death. It's like the foundation myth of the tradition. What about the third degree? What are the key events there? What's this great mystery that they reveal at this highest level?
The third degree, it begins with the magus asking the high priestess to purify him. He gets symbolically bound and scourged, so again you see this balance of service and authority between them. Then the magus binds and ties the high priestess to the altar and says that she's going to erect the sacred altar, setting the stage for this big reveal. He then symbolically scourges her. The great mystery is revealed, especially if the high priestess hasn't done this right before. The book says, and this is really important, in the old times, a woman was the altar, emphasizing that the female body is inherently sacred. Then the priestess, she lies down in the center of the circle, with her vulva right at the center point. And they declare that this point is the origin of all creation, something to be deeply revered. Then they have these powerful invocations to the circle of stars and the queen of space, all focused on the center point as the beginning of everything. The holy twin pillars, Boaz and Joachim, symbols from other traditions, those are represented by kisses on the breasts. And then they do the eightfold kiss, with an invocation that talks about the connection of all life and the 5 points of fellowship, feet to feet, knee to knee, groin to groin, breast to breast, arms around each other's backs, and lips to lips. So it's a deep union, And finally, they exchange their sacred names, the magus and the high priestess, cementing their spiritual bond and their roles in the coven. And then the high priestess closes the circle, ending the initiation.
Wow, that's a powerful symbolic description of the third degree. It's all about the body being sacred and everything being connected. Let's switch gears a bit and talk about the cakes and wine ritual. It seems simple, but what's the deeper meaning? What's its purpose?
The cakes and wine ritual, it's about sharing a blessing together, usually after they've done more intense magic. It's grounding, a way to reconnect. The magus, he kneels and offers a chalice. The cup, to the witch, who's usually sitting on the altar, honored. She then takes her athame and touches the point of it to the wine in the cup. The magus explains that the athame represents the male principle, the active force, and the cup is the female principle, the receptive force, and when they come together, it's blessed sacred. She puts the athame down, takes the cup, drinks from it, and then shares it with everyone else in the circle. Then he gives her a paten, a plate with cakes on it, and she blesses those by drawing a pentagram over them with the athame before eating some and then sharing them with the coven. And it's interesting, the book says that they sometimes used ale or mead instead of wine, something with life in it, connecting it back to nature. The cakes and wine ritual is about strengthening those bonds within the coven through sharing food and that symbolic union of the male and female principles.
It's more than just a snack, then. It's a powerful act of communion. What about the Sabbats? The Book of Shadows gives details on rituals for those two, right?
Yes, it gives a framework for celebrating the 8 major festivals in the Wiccan Wheel of the Year. These include the 4 greater Sabbats: November Eve, which is Samhain, February Eve, which is Imbolc, May Eve, or Beltane, and August Eve, also known as Lughnasadh, and then you have the 4 lesser Sabbats, which fall on the spring and autumn equinoxes and the summer and winter solstices. A lot of things are common to all these rituals. They always start by casting the circle, purifying the participants, which might involve binding and scourging. Then they call upon specific deities, the ones whose energies are, most connected to that particular season, like the Dread Lord of the Shadows at Samhain or the Great Mother at Beltane. Then there's the 5-fold kiss, and they share the cakes and wine to create a sense of togetherness. And sometimes they might symbolically or actually perform the Great Rite, which represents that union of the divine, masculine, and feminine. It's all very connected to the rhythms of nature, the changing of the seasons.
Right. And it sounds like each Sabbat has its own special activities, too. Can you give us some examples?
Sure. November Eve, Samhain, when they honor the ancestors and that veil between worlds is thin, they often have processions with torches or candles to guide people through the darkness. For February Eve, Imbolc, which is about purification and new beginnings, they dance with drawn swords to ward off negativity and show their inner strength. May Eve, Beltane, celebrating fertility and life, and August Eve, Lughnasadh, the first harvest, both sometimes have people riding poles or brooms, which is like an old folk custom and symbolizes moving between worlds. Then there's leaping over bonfires at the spring equinox to cleanse and welcome back the light. At the summer solstice, they might plunge the wand into a cauldron of water, mixing the solar and lunar energies. Candle games are sometimes played at August Eve and the autumn equinox, showing the fading light and the balance between dark and light. Finally, at the winter solstice, the longest night, they often light new torches from a central fire, symbolizing the sun's rebirth and the hope for the return of warmth and light. So you see, the Sabbats are all about the cycle of the year, celebrating life, recognizing death and rebirth, fertility, and honoring the gods and goddesses connected to each one.
The Book of Shadows also talks about chants. What does it say about them? What are they for? And are there any specific examples?
Well, it says that ancient witches use lots of different chants and songs, especially in their dances. But sadly, many of them have been lost over time. They mention the cry IAU and suggest it might be connected to the ancient Greek cries EVO or EVOE, which were used in like ecstatic rituals, maybe Dionysian or something like that. They even speculate that IAU could be an abbreviation of a longer invocation, similar to how they use mystical acronyms like EGLA or in the Hebrew alphabet. The book stresses that these chants, these sounds, can have a really powerful effect on people during the rituals. They can raise energy and change your state of consciousness. They also mention other calls and phrases like Aihua, Egia, and even some that seem like gibberish. They even suggest that some of these might be mispronounced or corrupted versions of older invocations, or even things they made up during times of persecution, like a secret code, or things they were forced to say under torture. The point is, these sounds have a deep meaning and power within the rituals.
And then there's a section on to help the sick, which is interesting. What practical advice does the Book of Shadows give for healing, and are there any ethical considerations?
This section really emphasizes the importance of joy, of banishing fear, both for your own health and for helping others to heal. It tells practitioners to remember the joys of the Sabbath, to recharge themselves.
and it suggests that focusing on helping others can actually distract you from your own problems. Practically, they mention using soothing remedies and the importance of helping the sick person to believe they can get better, to focus on positive thoughts. Ethically, it suggests that even if you have to let someone believe the coven has more power than it does, if that helps them heal through the placebo effect or faith, then it's not necessarily a bad thing. They also describe techniques like focusing your gaze and using hypnotic suggestion to help someone fall into a restful sleep and plant positive ideas in their mind. But there's a very strong warning against telling anyone you're part of the craft, because of the very real danger of persecution back then. It also suggests working with the beliefs the sick person already has, like using amulets if they find them comforting. And it stresses how important it is for the healer themselves to be in a good state of mind, to be happy and positive. Finally, they mention that praying to the goddess, specifically the Amalthean horn prayer, can be helpful alongside other healing practices.
So they're very aware of the power of belief and suggestion. The Book of Shadows also talks about the scourge and the kiss. What's their significance beyond the initiations?
The scourge, outside of initiations, is seen as a powerful tool for calling upon the gods and for spellbinding. For example, they use it in the Amalthean horn invocation to the goddess Aradia. They believe that the rhythm of the striking helps to focus energy and direct your intention. It's also used to maintain order and discipline in the coven. The high priest or high priestess can use the scourge to punish someone for breaking the rules, and then they usually have to give fivefold kisses as a kind of apology and way to be accepted back into the group. And the person being scourged is supposed to accept the punishment as just. The number of strokes, 3, 7, 9, and 21, they add up to 40, which is 2 score, and that number has other meanings in the tradition. It's connected to other important numbers like 3, 5, and 8, which is the number of kisses in the fivefold kiss, and also the number of elemental weapons. 2 score is also the total number of kisses in the fivefold kiss. The book even includes a recipe for a special anointing ointment to use with the scourge, so it's all very connected.
There's also a section on the priestess and the sword. What's that about?
That's a specific guideline. And it says, when a woman takes the main part in worship of the male god, she must be girt with a sword. What it means is, usually the male magus embodies the god in rituals, but if there's no man of the right rank and knowledge available, then a woman can take on that role, but she has to be ritually armed as a man. Specifically, she wears a sword. They even say she should wear it sheathed on her belt when she needs her hands free, but otherwise, she should carry it in her hand to maintain that symbolic connection to the god. And if a woman is representing the god, any other women inside the circle have to carry swords too. The ones outside the circle would use the athema. They make it clear that women can represent either the god or the goddess, but men can only represent the god.
There's a section called the warning that sounds pretty serious. What are the main instructions and concerns in that part of the book?
The warning lays out a lot of strict rules about the Book of Shadows, and you can really see the historical context there, the fear of persecution, the need for secrecy. It says everyone has to have their own copy of the book, handwritten, and you can share copies, but you can never give your original book away, and you can't keep someone else's handwritten book. If there's any danger, you have to destroy the book immediately. They really want people to memorize as much as they can, so the tradition survives if the book is lost or destroyed. And if you do have to destroy your book, you have to rewrite it from memory as soon as it's safe. If someone in the coven dies, their Book of Shadows has to be destroyed too, so it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. They emphasize the danger, saying, "Ye may not be a witch alone," meaning everyone's at risk. And they say to get rid of anything that could link you to the craft. If you're caught with the book or questioned, you have to pretend you don't know anything, say it was all just bad dreams or that a demon made you write it. If they torture you, they say to confess to anything to make it stop. But if they ask about your beliefs, talk about impossible things, like they were just dreams. And if you do confess under torture, deny it later. They say the Brotherhood, the wider network of witches, will help you escape if you stay strong. But if you betray anyone, you're on your own. They even mention a drug called Lael that they'd give you at the stake to die painlessly. They tell you how to make your tools look ordinary, like making pentacles out of wax so you can destroy them easily. And never put any marks on your tools that could identify them. Lastly, they say never brag about being a witch, never threaten anyone using magic, and never wish harm on anyone. And if anyone ever mentions witchcraft to you, act like you're scared of it to avoid suspicion.
It's a chilling reminder of how dangerous it was back then and how important secrecy and solidarity were. The Book of Shadows also has a section called Of the Ordeal of the Art Magical. What does it say about the more, well, physically intense or unusual parts of the rituals?
That section is really interesting. It talks about those demanding elements, but it says that the physical challenge isn't the point. It's about the spirit, the intention behind it. They compare it to a knight's armor, which is heavy but worn with pride because it represents what they are. Binding and scourging, they're not just tests of endurance. They're meant to make your perception sharper, to enhance your inner vision. The idea is that by restricting your physical senses with binding and stimulating your body in a controlled way with scourging, you can turn your focus inward and change your state of consciousness by